Okay, aloha everybody. My name is Kaliko Castile. I'm the co-founder at Thunderstorm Strategies, also the host here at KalikoVision. I'm really excited to have today's conversation because it's breaking news for folks that don't know. We had really big news out of the Biden administration today. The Drug Enforcement Administration, the DEA, has decided to take HHS, the Health and Human Services Department's recommendation to move cannabis from Schedule 1 to a Schedule 3 drug. We're going to get into what a schedule even is and what those various sort of distinctions mean here in a little bit. But I'm joined today by my good friend, Kat Packer from the Drug Policy Alliance. She's the director of drug markets and legal regulation, and is one of the brains behind a lot of the work that's been going on, trying to inform the administration about things that we can be doing to make sure that President Biden does make good on his promise to make sure that no one is in jail for a plant. And obviously in an election year, it's more important than ever that things be happening. But we want to dispel some myths, make sure that we're educating people about what actually did happen today, what didn't happen today, so folks aren't going out there and getting themselves in trouble, and also so that we can continue to hold the Biden administration and Congress accountable. So, Kat, thank you so much for joining us today. Really appreciate you making time, especially on a very, very busy day.
Yeah, absolutely. Today was a very busy day.
I'm sure your inbox and your phone is blowing up. I know you've already had some interview requests, and I just got done sending out a bunch of press releases for the the United for Marijuana Decriminalization group that we're both part of and have been kind of preparing for this eventual announcement. I think a lot of people have been speculating for quite some time now that the DEA was likely to agree with HHS and their recommendation that they put forth a couple of months ago. But now it's official, at least through the AP reporting and other outlets now confirming and corroborating the stuff. Although the DEA, the administration, are not commenting officially on this, it does sound like cat's out of the bag and this is happening. So what does today's news mean, in general for people?
Yeah, this is something that we've been anticipating for a while now. As you mentioned, we had already learned back in the summer that the Department of Health and Human Services had recommended to the DEA that marijuana be moved from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3. But ultimately, it is the DEA that's making the final determination. After HHS provided its recommendation, DEA was conducting its own analysis. And so with today's reporting from AP, that the DEA is moving forward with a move to Schedule 3, this essentially means that the DEA proposal would be to accept HHS's recommendation to move marijuana to Schedule 3. But I'm hopeful that we'll have some time to jump into why, for many, many different stakeholders, individuals across the country, this is going to be completely insufficient. Folks need to know, first and foremost, that a move to Schedule 3 continues federal marijuana criminalization. It is not in any form or fashion legalization. It is not decriminalization. It is essentially a new classification under an existing federal law. And I'm sure we'll talk about the origins of that federal law, but that's essentially what this announcement is today, is the latest in what has been an ongoing process that was initiated by President Biden back in October of 2022. So now we're here at the end of April in 2024 in the next iteration of this administrative process.
Yeah, it's actually kind of wild to even think that it was back in the summer when HHS made that recommendation. I know I said a few months ago, but it has been quite some time. So this has been in the works. And, we'll get into the politics of, who benefits from this? Does the president benefit from this? Is he able to say that he kept his promise? But one of the things I really kind of want to outline for people is, because most people don't even understand this basic thing. What do people mean when they say a scheduled substance? What does Schedule 1 versus Schedule 3 mean? Like, for people who are not in the policy making rooms, like, what does that even mean for folks?
Yeah, so this is a great foundational question. So there's a law known as the Controlled Substances Act, and any drug that is subject to this particular federal law is controlled and placed in a specific category. And there are 5 different categories or schedules that drugs that are controlled under this or regulated under this particular federal law, the Controlled Substances Act, can be placed in. The categorization depends on whether or not a drug is considered to have a currently accepted medical use. Essentially, all Schedule I drugs are those that do not have a currently accepted medical use. If you're in Schedules 2 through 5, that means that it's a drug that is considered to have a currently accepted medical use, but there are less restrictions as you get in the higher schedules of numbers. And there's also concern generally that their drugs are less dangerous when they're in higher scheduled drugs. But with cannabis specifically, it doesn't matter what specific schedule it is placed. There are specific provisions and laws in the Controlled Substances Act that essentially say that no matter where marijuana is placed within the schedules, so long it is subject to the Controlled Substances Act, it's going to be criminalized. And so that's why advocates and communities who continue to be impacted by criminalization are demanding descheduling and decriminalization.
Yeah, I appreciate you hitting on that nuance there. And I already had this question up here, even though you kind of already answered it, but I want to underline it again, right? So the move from Schedule I to Schedule 3 does not mean weed is legal now, right?
Correct. Right now, marijuana is a Schedule I substance. It is illegal at the federal level. It will remain just as illegal when marijuana is moved, or if marijuana is indeed moved to Schedule 3.
And I mean, you say if, so can we get even like underlining that a little bit? What is kind of like now that they are saying that they're going to accept HHS recommendation, is that it? Like this is the end of the road? Like there is no potential of moving to deschedule through this process, or like is I guess is that the end of the road for the rescheduling or the descheduling of cannabis?
Not completely. I mean, the reality is that we expect the DEA to propose a rule. If it's a proposal, it's just that. And so we expect with this proposal for there to be an opportunity for public comment, potentially public hearings. Ultimately, the DEA will be kind of the final arbiter and decision maker in this process. And so I do think that we can anticipate that it is very likely that Schedule 3 will be the final decision. But the reality is that it is not a done deal, and the process is not complete. There is still an opportunity for folks to engage. And there's a real possibility that regardless of what the decision is, it could be litigated. As stakeholders in the cannabis space, we know that this is an increasingly litigious space. I'm sure that there could and will be different attempts at appeals or litigation, and so this process could continue for quite some time. But it's not over, and it's important that when we have this public comment process, that stakeholders who are impacted by cannabis criminalization, stakeholders who support federal criminalization, if you're in a state that has adult use cannabis, if you're in a state that has medical cannabis, if you're a patient, if you're a veteran, if you're somebody who's impacted, for you to participate in this public comment process and articulate your support for federal decriminalization, and understanding that the only way that we're going to get to federal decriminalization is through descheduling. We are in an election year, and I do think that through this public comment process, we as a people have an opportunity to demonstrate, one, that this is an issue that we care about, that we know that we're impacted by, and that we know that the administration can continue to deliver on and take action to deliver on immediately.
And I know we'll have further reminders throughout this podcast today for folks to be prepared for the public comment period and for folks to take action to make sure that they are having their voice heard. I know one of the big questions that we're hearing, obviously, because we are tangential, we work in the cannabis industry. You were a former regulator in the city of LA, so you know very well what it's like to stand up these marketplaces. What does this announcement mean for state marijuana programs? I know we just said weed's not legal, but what does it mean for all of these states who already have state legal programs, who really have been setting these up because they wanted to not treat it like a Schedule I drug? What does that mean for them?
Yeah, so unfortunately, this is not really going to spell progress for state marijuana programs themselves. Marijuana itself will continue to be criminalized. Sales will continue to be criminalized, essentially under a rescheduling decision. And this is the case with any scheduled substances. If you want to handle a controlled substance, if you want to manufacture or produce, sale a controlled substance, you need to get a registration from the DEA, and you need to follow DEA regulations. And the DEA is not handing out permits to people who are engaged in illegal activity via state marijuana programs. And so the government programs themselves will continue to remain illegal under federal law. I think for the programs that exist, there's this real opportunity for, one, there's this huge gap that exists right now. One, with 24 states that have adult use cannabis programs, many more states that have medical programs, and federal prohibition. And what we really need is to be taking steps to close that gap, not continuing that gap or implementing policies that maintain or create new barriers. And with a move to Schedule 3, essentially, it would require, and this is no shift from what is required from Schedule 1 substances. I think the challenge for folks, as I've seen like different headlines talk about this issue, there's this misconception where folks think that currently accepted medical use means that there will be some form of lawful medical marijuana. And what I often have to remind folks is that the rescheduling process or the scheduling process is one thing. FDA approval of a drug is another. And the FDA has not approved marijuana to be used as a drug product for any specific medical purpose. And unless and until that happens, folks aren't going to be afforded protections for their marijuana use. And even when that happens, it's going to require kind of a product by product authorization. And so all of the products that are part of these state medical marijuana programs, all of the participants, the licensees will remain illegal if marijuana is moved to Schedule 3.
Okay, I appreciate you underlining that. I think one of the things that, as people are thinking about how this shifts, there's been really big news for people who are in the industry that this would affect the tax rates for cannabis businesses at the federal level. So even though it's not going to affect the programs and improve those or make those in a better situation, there seems to be a lot of excitement around this potential for a tax break. But can you explain why, even though it's not going to be descheduled, there's still the ability for people to be able to get this, we'll call it tax parity with other small businesses?
Yeah, and I think tax parity is the appropriate way to frame it. But it's not this legal consequence of tax parity is not directly dependent of the scheduling process itself, or it's not a specific provision of the Controlled Substances Act. There's another body of law that deals with tax code, a specific provision known as 280E that says that businesses can't make normal business deductions if they're engaged in industries associated with Schedule 1 or Schedule 2 substances. And so if marijuana were moved to Schedule 3, that particular provision that's currently applicable to marijuana in the marijuana industry would no longer be applicable. And so the marijuana industry for the first time would have the opportunity to have tax parity because right now they are not able to make those normal business deductions. And so there are lots of stakeholders, industry participants who are in desperate need of financial relief and assistance. And I think that that's part of the reason why these folks are so excited, particularly about this particular part of the reform.
For sure. And I'm going to we'll dive a little bit deeper into this part, particularly because I know for folks who are watching, a lot of them are in the industry. They are small business owners, potentially members of MCBA when I was, a board member there. I think what I kind of find interesting and is that, you have a lot of folks who are very excited about the 280E thing. I worked at NCIA for quite some time, so this is one of the things that we worked on for a very long time. And for folks who don't understand, 280E basically means that retailers, so dispensary owners, essentially have like a 70+% gross tax rate to the federal government. So say, a retailer takes in $1 million in receipts, right? If on a 70% tax rate, that means that they owe 70% of that back to the federal government, even if they weren't profitable, right? So it's 70% on your gross receipts, right? So this is a fundamental structural hurdle for a lot of businesses to become profitable, right? So I want to make sure that I underline this is a very important thing that we have been working on incrementally for quite some time, and it will be really important for small businesses. But what I'm afraid about, and what I would love to get into the weeds with you a little bit about here, is what this means from a political power standpoint, right? I think my concern has been that many of the larger folks who are understandably excited about 280E tax relief stand to gain hundreds of millions of dollars a year in taxes back to them, right? And being able to hold on to that. And currently we're watching a lot of these same players who have been advocating for this small incremental change in Schedule 3, railroading equity efforts in places like New York, where they're running lawsuits to stop an equitable rollout of the industry. They're running monopoly bills in states like Florida, which we're going to see later this year, which doesn't do anything to broaden sort of the ownership in the industry. Like, can you talk a little bit about kind of some of the implications about whether it's monopolization or consolidation of the industry, or some of the things we should be potentially aware of or concerned about if we stay in this murky place of Schedule 3, where we're getting our tax parity, but we have not fully descheduled. Weed is not legal, but some people are off to the races with their investments and, hoping to make some dollars.
Yeah, I appreciate you raising that, Kaliko. I know we've had this conversation a number of different times. But there is this real concern that particularly that this tax relief is not going to be felt proportionally across all communities. And what specifically the industry is going to reinvest those dollars into. There's a potential right now because there are so many small businesses, minority-owned businesses, equity-owned businesses that are struggling. That if we see this one tax relief, and then what's also happening that is significant to note amidst these even just whiffs of conversations about rescheduling or different reforms, it's impacting the stock market. And we're seeing that I had a screenshot today of the different stock market indications and how all of these large industry players are having these enormous investments just with different trickles of news over time, huge investments. Today, I'm sure we'll see, but who's not getting these investments in these moments when this news is happening are small businesses, minority-owned businesses, equity-owned businesses. And so I think that we could be dealing with this kind of perfect storm situation. Storm sounds like it's inevitable or caused by nature. In reality, this is intentional actors that are doing this. But we could see a situation where small business operators are so financially stretched, and large operators have such a large influx of resources that we start to see small players get gobbled up by larger players almost overnight. And in reality, this is what many of these large operators are planning for. It's a part of their strategy to continue to expand and be able to make returns on investments that in many places have gone bad because they've displaced existing consumers and markets and just engaged in ways that aren't supportive of community. And so I do think that there's real reason to have concern about the rhetoric and who's championing this. And what I just caution, folks want to call it historic, fine. Folks want to call it progress, fine. But clarify who it's historic for, who it's making progress for, and who it's leaving behind. And in this moment, with a rescheduling decision, with all that we know about marijuana's racist history and its harms, this type of decision ignores that reality and leaves those communities behind. And that's something that I know you and the communities and organizations that we work closely with just cannot stay silent on in this moment.
Yeah, I think the specter of when you said overnight, I actually got chills up my arm a little bit, because it's like there are people who have been preparing for this potential for years, right? Like, and I think you raised the point that a lot of folks are now going to be able to become profitable when they've been bleeding money for a long time, right? I think it's really important to note that there are a lot of small businesses out there who get by with very little money. They're hard-nosed entrepreneurs who find a way to figure it out. And then you have other people who are coming from C-suites of other industries, joining publicly traded cannabis companies, and basically tanking the companies into the ground because they're making up to this point, have made bad projections on both the politics of the industry, but also the industry itself. And then now have sort of led us into this place of like, they've sucked up all the capital that people wanted to bring into the industry because it went into these bad bets. And then now we're in this place of desperation where you have people who saw some tweets today. People were elated, was the word I saw about this news, right? And it's like, because we've become so desperate for any sort of change or anything that feels like progress, that this is something that we're willing to celebrate. But really, we are partially in this place because the allocation of capital has gone to these large players and to the tunes of hundreds of millions of dollars over the last decade, right? Billions of dollars over the last decade. But the tiniest fraction, we're talking 0.001% of that, has gone into investing in the kind of broad-based advocacy that's actually necessary to create the space that they can actually make the money that they always told their investors they could make, right? And so, I don't know, I feel like we kind of need to, in this moment, while we're letting people celebrate, also remind folks why it is that we feel so excited about this when change is on our side, right? We have 24 states in the District of Columbia with legal cannabis now. Like, we're literally winning. Like, we have most of the states with medical cannabis. Like, it's wild to me that we are still kind of arguing from a place of desperation rather than a place of power. And I think, one of the things I want to highlight and give a shout out is we were obviously all in DC for 420 week, Last Prisoner Project, and a bunch of other organizations got together for the 420 Day of Action, which was huge. Some members of our Marijuana Justice Coalition got a chance to meet with Senator Schumer and talk with him about the CAOA, his piece of legislation that would deschedule in the Senate. But I think it's like really important for us to remember our power, right? Even in this moment when, we should take our wins where we can get them. But I think this is kind of a moment where we have to reflect and not suddenly rest back on our laurels because we suddenly made it to some fictitious finish line we felt like we were racing towards, when in reality, it's still another half marathon away, right? Like, I don't know, any further thoughts or anything you want to underline just about kind of this moment that we're in and kind of how we need to make sure that we are harnessing this moment to create some momentum towards the end goal that we all know we need to get to, which is descheduling, rather than sort of sitting in this place where we kind of start counting our money and get really excited because suddenly we are profitable and we feel like we can not only pay our bills, but do a little extra,
Yeah, people are counting their money and they're not counting the people who are still in prison. They're not counting the, people who are still impacted by criminal records. They're not counting the cannabis consumers who can be deported or, lose their children or get kicked out of housing or lose educational or employment opportunities. Like, count your money, but also count like these folks too. And I think that like this is the piece that I think the industry has a real opportunity to like step up and also to continue to like do the work that it says that it's doing and delivering for communities. because I feel like, I was doing work in California at the local level for several years. I've been working at the federal level for the last 2 years. And what I've seen in the advocacy space at the federal level is very similar to some of the concerns that we're raising with the rescheduling conversation. What have folks been focused on in Congress the last couple iterations?
Safe banking.
Safe banking, something that would provide protections to financial institutions who, by the way, have never been subject to federal enforcement. But guess who has been subject to federal enforcement? And we can count it over and over and over and over and over again. And so we can continue to try and prioritize profits, or we can recenter our campaigns around people. And I think that when you're a good business owner and you are a contributing member of your community as a business owner, you can do both. And that's what we're expecting, I think, out of the industry right now, and also out of our government leaders. Kaliko, I think one of the things that kind of frustrates me the most as an advocate in the space, and I've both worked in government and served as an advocate. But one of the things that frustrates me in this moment is I do feel as though we are regressing, we're backtracking, because in 2020, when you had presidential candidates who were on the stage, you had every candidate essentially except every Democratic candidate except President Biden, who was full-throatedly supporting descheduling and decriminalization. And somehow we've gotten to a point where people feel more politically comfortable talking about and supporting rescheduling, which would continue criminalization, we've had attorney generals and governors of adult use marijuana programs come out and support rescheduling cannabis, as opposed to even having the courage to do both, which is, maybe call this historic and acknowledge the tax relief or whatever specific benefit there is, and to be specific about what that benefit is and who it's for, but to acknowledge that this is completely insufficient. This is not what was promised. This is not what's needed. And we know better. We know better.
Yeah, I would love to nail down on that point, because I think, it is 2024. We are in a re-election year. The president now, I mean, I know we were in a group chat and you had mentioned that you saw a CNN clip about, some commentator or pundit saying that now Biden can go out there and get on the campaign trail and say he kept his promise. So do you expect that that's what we're going to see? Or how can we make sure that on the campaign trail, we're educating people about the fact that he did not, in fact, get anybody out of prison? He has not changed the law, and by his own definition, he has not decriminalized anything.
Yeah, there's been so much misinformation. I was really disheartened to see that CNN clip today, but I expect that there's going to be a ton of more misinformation, people just overstating some of the legal implications, consequences of rescheduling, misstating that President Biden has kept his cannabis-related promises. To clarify again, he promised to decriminalize marijuana use and expunge related records. He's done neither. Moving marijuana to Schedule III would do neither. But, Kaliko, I know that we've been working very closely with the Drug Policy Alliance, with United for Marijuana Decriminalization, with organizations like Marijuana Justice Coalition, to educate folks about the different implications of rescheduling versus descheduling, to remind folks the promises that President Biden made in 2020. But in order for us to really make an impact in this moment, we're going to need the folks that we've shared this information with to share it with their people. And for those people to share it with their people, we need folks to tap in. And this is the moment. We've never had Another moment in history like this one where we've had more attention every single week. There's something else that the president, he's mostly repeating things that he's already said. But we've never had a president repeat so many statements that he said before already on marijuana reform. And people want to call that progress. That's progress. We've never before had this opportunity where we'll have an opportunity to provide direct feedback to the administration on marijuana status under federal law. And so I just encourage folks to not take this decision for granted. I'm of the opinion that this is something that our grandparents should have dealt with, our parents should have dealt with. Kaliko, we should not be dealing with federal cannabis criminalization. This should have been done a long time ago.
Yes.
But like, this is our opportunity to be very clear about what we need and to take action and demand action to get those very things done.
I'll probably title this episode "It's Time to Step Up," because I do think like that is the clear message that it's, whether it's the industry, consumers, advocates, we do need to take advantage of this moment, and it is time to step up, because I do think that, like, you know, I'm someone who grew up as a history buff. I appreciate American history. When we got the opportunity to meet Senator Schumer last week, we got a chance to go to the majority leader's office directly across the hallway from the Senate floor, right? There has not ever been another Senate majority leader who has brought in a group of cannabis advocates and talked to them and then had a little photo op too, right? So like, it is a big deal where we're at, even as like we get frustrated with the glacial pace of the American political system. It's important to remind folks that A, that's how it's designed. B, you don't have to be happy with it. We're not, right? But C, you still have to work within it, right? Because that is the system we have. And so I do think it's really important, like you said, that like we take this moment for what it is, and that is that a president of the United States has decided to take an administrative action to change the status of cannabis under federal law, right? It's a plain and simple fact. That is what has happened. President Obama, for what it's worth, had the Cole memo, but didn't do that. Right. So, you know, I do think this is something that does speak to the historic nature. And I do think that we need to both keep the political pressure on President Biden and members of Congress to finish the job, for them to step up and to, you know, pass a descheduling bill with, you know, regulations in place that ultimately guard against monopolization of the industry. I think friend Shalene Title, who's running Parabola Center and part of the United for Marijuana Decriminalization, speaking a lot to the need for us to set up a system in which we are protecting against what I would just call the eventual monopolization of the industry, right? We're trying to guard against it, but on the trajectory where we're headed, that is where we're going. And I do think it's really important for us to use the public comment period, but also this summer, right? Like, this is an election summer. We should be showing up at as many events for our congressional members who are all up for re-election. Well, 1/3 of the Senate plus the entirety of the House is all up for re-election. The balance of the House literally hangs in the balance of like 5 different races, right? So we can't affect how the outcome of this works if we do, as you say, share this with our network, make sure that we're organizing in our own communities, holding our own local, state, of elected officials accountable, and asking them to hold their colleagues accountable, right? All this sort of stuff trickles up. And if we're organizing at the grassroots really heavy over the summer, I think we can get to a place where, I'll just say, jaw willing, President Biden is reelected and we still have a democracy next year, that we can come back in the next Congress and get a full piece of descheduling legislation actually passed. Because I think we're all on the same agreement, or in the same boat, that even folks who are excited about a 280E break also acknowledge that we have to get to descheduling in order for everything to get where we need it to go. So I do think that's a really great point. And I think one of the things that I would love to sort of ask you, as we're thinking about this public comment period coming up and people are maybe preparing themselves for that, like, how can people be thinking about how they want to express themselves, right? We don't want a bunch of fuck yous, like, deschedule now, right? Like, this is a chance for us to go on the historic record. And if the DEA maintains its Schedule 3 status, at least we can put thousands of comments into the record about what should have happened, right? With cited sources and that sort of stuff. But any resources you might point people to, or any advice you would have for people as they prepare for a public comment period?
Yeah, a couple of things. I would encourage folks to go to decriminalizemarijuana.com, follow United for Marijuana Decriminalization. We're going to be sharing a lot of great resources about the upcoming public comment process. You can also follow Drug Policy Alliance and our related work on the rescheduling process, descheduling process at deschedulemarijuana.com. We've actually put together a tool that will help folks submit public comment directly to the DEA once the public comment process becomes available. We have some draft public comment text in there, but folks will be able to edit that and share what they want. We'll also be launching a number of different educational efforts to help different individuals and organizations submit public comment. But we're going to be working right alongside community, letting folks know when the public comment process begins, how long it's going to last, and doing everything that we can to encourage stakeholders to make sure that their voices are heard in this moment. And we're not going to be limited to the public comment process either. Like, that is one process that we want to absolutely be able to leverage, because it is important for us to be on the record with our support of federal marijuana decriminalization. And at the same time, I think it's very important for us to be clear and that we have opportunities outside of the administrative review process, both opportunities from Congress and the Biden administration to take action. And so, folks shouldn't feel defeated in any form or fashion, or feel like there isn't work to do. Both Congress and the administration have work to do. Oh, Kaliko, I can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can.
Yeah, cool. Thank you. So I was saying, like, as somebody who has not been really pumped about the idea of the Schedule 3 announcement coming down, I have to sort of think to myself that this is something that, like, now that we have this opportunity to have the public comment period, like, I kind of feel like we almost have, and I was saying before I was on mute there, that, like, I've been reflecting through the day that, like, I kind of feel now that we almost have more avenues available to us than we've ever had as advocates, right? Like, I think prior to even this administrative review process is like, okay, your only option is to talk to Congress. There's 535 members of them. They're busy with a bunch of other geopolitical issues. And this is not one of the top issues. But, now we're in this place where, like you said, you have, potential congressional movement. We have this administrative review. But then I know you've been doing a lot of work researching about what the administration can still do, even under a Schedule 3, with its own administrative powers to lessen the harms caused by marijuana prohibition. Also considering that we may still see prohibition for years to come until Congress finally does take a move. Like, what are some of the things that the administration can be doing to still mitigate some of the harms?
Yeah, I think that there are lots of ways. What I want to be able to do is go back to Black, Latino, youth populations, communities who have been impacted by cannabis criminalization, and be able to tell them something that President Biden has done specifically on their behalf in terms of the promises that he's made. And right now, I'm struggling to communicate that to communities who have been most impacted. I think that President Biden even expressly calling for decriminalization and descheduling right now in this moment, calling for the DEA to deschedule marijuana, calling on Congress to pass descheduling legislation would be significant. And these are things that he can do. He says that he supports decriminalizing marijuana use. Well, the only way to actually do that is to deschedule and decriminalize cannabis. So we want him to say that explicitly. He can also expand the pardons and commutation and clemency that he's done thus far. He promised to expunge cannabis-related records. He has pardoned individuals. Expungement would eliminate that criminal record entirely. With a pardon, the criminal record still exists, but if someone has a certificate of that pardon, they could show it. It could be a means for them not to be discriminated against for things like jury duty or holding public office, et cetera. But the reality is that it falls short of the promises that he's made on expungement explicitly. But even still, those simple marijuana pardons that he provided, one, were only limited to citizens. So he could expand those so that we're no longer causing adverse immigration consequences and deporting folk. Marijuana is one of the number one reasons why folks get deported. He could also expand it so that we're covering offenses beyond simple marijuana possession. The reality is that people are engaged in more than just possessing marijuana. And states have authorized folks to use, possess, cultivate, manufacture, sell marijuana. And so if we're going to be moving forward with criminal justice reform, we have to make sure that we're not leaving those communities behind either. Beyond actions like that, there are, dozens of different federal agencies who each have discretion in how they advance and administer their policies. And they have policies where cannabis has been extremely impactful. Think about the Department of Labor, Department of Education, Department of Housing, and these specific types of barriers that are caused by cannabis criminalization. If we were to get President Biden to direct these agencies, for example, to identify how cannabis criminalization has caused harm to communities, to identify barriers, to develop a plan to address those barriers. This wouldn't even be a new concept. We've actually had something similar for financial institutions, if you could guess, for almost 10 years now.
Totally makes sense.
Yeah. So, since 2014, there's been guidance from the Treasury Department that essentially has been the federal government's means of, even in the midst of marijuana being a Schedule I drug and it being criminalized, the federal government trying to provide protections to financial institutions to say, we're going to protect you anyway. So if we can create, through Treasury guidance to protect financial institutions, why can't we do something similar across all federal agencies to protect individuals? This could be something that could also be a new Cole memo, new enforcement guidance from the Department of Justice. But there are all of these different agencies that report to President Biden, and President Biden could at the very least begin the work to get these agencies thinking about these harms and addressing them. Because, Kaliko, my concern is that, we've been doing a lot of work trying to move different pieces of federal legislation, and these federal descheduling bills are pretty big. That's why we refer to them as being comprehensive. They try to address, dozens of different issues and stakeholders, but they involved so many different agencies. And as someone who's been responsible for implementing even what was just, the city of LA, but relatively smaller package of policy, and thinking about all of the different agencies that had to be involved for the first time, why would we wait until legalization to get these agencies? I mean, this is the issue that we have at the local and state level. Why equity programs and regulatory programs have so many challenges is because folks aren't thinking about these issues until we legalize. We have an opportunity right now at the federal government to learn from all of the lessons that have happened at the state, specifically on equity. And there are lots of lessons learned, but the federal government has got to be willing to do that work. And President Biden has an opportunity and a responsibility to direct that work.
I mean, as you start to sort of lay out all of the different agencies and how they touch so many different people in different lives in different ways, but ultimately can effectuate that positively, my wheels just start to turn about all of the places, all the touch points that you potentially could be cleaning up there. I think one of the places my mind also went as you were talking there is, I think it's a great point that we can start now to direct the agencies to start figuring out how they're going to handle legal cannabis, because, well, half the country already has it, and it's going to be coming down at a federal level eventually. And then, I was thinking to myself, Senator Hickenlooper has this Prepare Act. So there's this, bill in the Senate that would start a commission to study cannabis legalization and prepare us for that. But it seems like the way you're laying it out, we could just start preparing. Like, we don't actually have to debate it through a committee process, get a bill passed, and then start preparing a thing. Like, we could see some leadership through the administration to actually start to task the agency heads with starting to figure out how they would implement that. It would get us a lot further down the road, probably a lot quicker than trying to get a bill done. My opinion.
You've found something there, Kaliko. We actually don't need a bill to get a commission going, or to get the administration to establish a working group, or to actually get the administration to just get its agencies to start to do this work. And so I think it's important that communities know that while the administrative review process itself is limited, the Biden administration's authority through the executive branch is widespread. And we really, really desperately need him to tap into the full weight of his administration to deliver on his promises. If he's not willing to do that on behalf of communities, then I think it's time for us to have another conversation.
Yeah, that's totally fair. And I really appreciate you making that point. I'm immediately thinking about how, while we need to hold his feet to the fire, or hold him accountable, and ultimately in the political world, you hold people accountable by withholding your vote if they're not doing what you're asking. But also, I'm like thinking about what would it be like to try to navigate the Trump administration under this sort of new regime, right? Because this is happening. So like, now we are going to now have a federal government that will likely treat cannabis as a Schedule III drug, and it just seems like it would be a world different to try to talk to the administration of the Trump administration to try to get something implemented in the way that we want to see it, right? With the equitable outcomes we want to see, versus now where, it's kind of begrudgingly, but they're moving and at least seemingly listening to what's happening. So I'm just curious what your thoughts would be on that dichotomy of having to educate the Biden administration versus trying to educate a second Trump administration.
Yeah. And I'd like my response to be nonpartisan, but I think that the reality is that we've dealt with both a Biden administration and a Trump administration on cannabis. We know what that looks like. It seems as though the Biden administration, at least rhetorically, is understanding that cannabis criminalization is a failure that has caused disparities. And that it's time to right its wrongs. Like, these are all things that President Biden has said. I haven't heard President Trump or a Trump administration say anything like that. And at the same time, communities who continue to be burdened by criminalization can't be forced into this false dichotomy of thinking that it's only Trump or Biden. We are making choices about so much more in all of the different ways that cannabis policy and the larger drug war impact our communities. And so it's not an A or a B option for us. We can't afford to make that calculation. I know that it may be different for other communities, but for the communities that I've served and continue to serve, we can't afford to do that in this moment.
Yeah, it's totally a fair point. And like, I think as we were talking earlier, like, this is the system we got. We kind of got to work with whatever we got. We got to figure out a best way to work within the situation that we have. I will be the naked partisan in this particular case so that you don't have to take the fire. But I do think that, like, it's important for people to remember, because I see a lot of stock bros on Twitter right now. And yeah, I still call it Twitter. But I see a lot of stock bros on Twitter right now still, like, kind of begrudgingly thanking Biden, but still like somehow thinking like he's not doing enough, or that Trump would somehow be better. And I just want to remind folks, it was Trump's attorney general who rescinded the Cole memo. All right. Like, we have the Biden administration now has moved forward with the administrative review process. Okay. That maybe did not go far enough, but what we need to make sure that we're pointing out, I want to point out to folks, is that the Trump administration was actually the administration that rescinded the Cole memo and made it even a murkier situation than it was before that, because President Obama tried to give some sort of, kind of a arm's length approval of the idea that the states could be doing what they wanted to do. And then the Trump AG rescinded that. And then I think it's really important because people are like, well, Trump didn't crack down on the industry, But a lot of people don't remember that the Attorney General Jeff Sessions, who rescinded the Cole memo, also got his ass fired because he got caught up in that Russiagate situation, and basically because he recused himself, Trump fired him. Right. So we didn't actually see what an AG Sessions under a Trump administration would do. So I think it's just worth mentioning for folks out there as you're evaluating in 2024 who you're going to vote for, that when you're looking at the track record, as you said, the two administrations we've had to work with, one has, I hate even using this term, move the ball forward, and one arguably took the ball and went home, right? And just said, you guys are not going to be able to play with this. And so, I just want to make sure I'm highlighting that, because I am seeing a lot of people on Twitter and other social media places where, they begrudgingly thanking Biden for what he's doing now, but then also somehow thinking Trump would be better. And he didn't get us to this point. So I'll leave it at that so that you don't have to pick that back up. But I do appreciate you laying out that as our communities are advocating on this issue, we kind of got to work with whoever we got. And it is not just an either or. There are many avenues for us to be able to take this fight to where it needs to go. So, Kat, I really appreciate you making time for us. I know it's been a very long day for you. We all started really early with an early meeting, and then now this big news where we've been responding as much as possible and kicking in motion all the things we've been preparing for at United for Marijuana Decriminalization. I want to make sure that people do go to decriminalizemarijuana.com. Right now, we have a petition on there to let the Biden administration know that you support descheduling. But in the coming days, when the DEA finally puts out their proposed rule on the Federal Register, when that is made, within the public comment period will officially start. And then we will update that website with a tool that you guys can actually use to submit your public comment to the DEA on this proposed rule. So make sure you are going to decriminalizemarijuana.com. Make sure you're following me on all the social medias, as well as Kat. I put her Twitter on here, but she recently tweeted out that the gloves are coming off, and she's been taking it easy on folks. So make sure you are following along, because I do think as things progress, things are only going to get more interesting. This is kind of like where the fun begins. Up to this point, we've kind of been on the outs and not able to officially engage with this process. Now we're there, and now we can start to hold the administration and Congress accountable. So I look forward to the months to come. But Kat, before we kind of break things off, any other sort of last comments or anything you want to leave folks with, or any words of inspiration for folks?
Kaliko, thank you for inviting me. This is the moment that we've been waiting for. Then this is the moment in time for us to get active and tap in. So please do connect with us. Please do continue to stay engaged. There's not an inevitability here. The only way that we actually get to the type of reform that we want is by demanding it. So this is not the time to stay silent. We need to get incredibly loud in this moment. So whatever that means for you, please continue to support federal marijuana decriminalization.
I love it. It is time to step up, and it is time to get loud. Let's make this a very hot summer as we continue to pressure the Biden administration to take further steps, as well as Congress, to get this job done. Kat, I really appreciate all the work that you're doing on the day-to-day to hold it down for our communities, and also to make sure that we do ultimately see an equitable cannabis industry get set up. As you said, like, it is not all doom and gloom. Things are not set in stone. There's a lot of work left to be done. And for folks who want to get involved and to do that work, make sure that you are going to decriminalizemarijuana.com and looking at all of the individual organizations that are a part of this coalition. We all sort of have our own lane that we sit in and that we work on a day-to-day, but we're all working together towards one common goal. But there's always volunteer opportunities to get involved, and ways just to make sure that you're having your voice heard, because it's easy for us to all sit back on the internet and feel like we're alone and that we're just shouting into the void. But when you actually get out into the community and start chatting with folks and holding lobbying meetings stuff, you really do start to find your power and realize that there are more of us than there are of them. And as long as we continue to show up, we'll be able to get to the promised land and get to where we want to go. So, Kat, thank you so much for joining us. Everyone else, thank you for listening to another episode of KalikoVision. Be sure to follow us on YouTube and all the social media channels, and we'll be bringing you further updates as this process progresses, and hopefully we'll be able to come back to you with some news that the Biden administration is now fully supporting descheduling, calling on Congress to do the right thing, expunging records, and fully making good on his promise to decriminalize marijuana. So thanks again, Kat. Appreciate you.
Bye.
Aloha.